To kick things off today, I just want to give a lot of credit to the card designers who did work on the cards that came out in Brilliant Stars. We saw a lot of really exciting things pretty much across the board, ranging from the multi-prize Pokemon V Star, trainer cards, and even my beloved single prize Pokemon as well. But there's still a handful of cards that kind of left me scratching my head, puzzled by some of the design decisions that were made. So that, of course, is going to be the focus of today's video. We're going to be checking out 5-ish cards that I think narrowly missed the mark with their designs, and I'll be redesigning them, hopefully making them a little bit more competitively viable in the process. That being said, I don't want to go too crazy with these designs today. I'm going to do my best to remain faithful to the original card design philosophy of these and try to keep these redesigns grounded and somewhat believable if possible. And of course, at the end of this video too, let me know down below in the comment section what you thought about these redesigns that we looked at today. But with that being said, remember to smack the like button to feed the YouTube algorithm, and let's jump in and redesign 5 cards from Brilliant Stars. So for the first redesign, this is going to be a pretty quick one. This is going to be the 3 Wormadam cards that came out in Brilliant Stars. And while I generally am kind of enthusiastic about the design of these cards, if we compare this to the Vespiquen all the way back from Ancient Origins that had this same attack, that Pokemon only did 20 plus, and that was in a time where Pokemon capped out at right over 200 HP. Whereas now it's very common to see Pokemon in the upper 200s and lower to mid 300s. I just don't think this damage has sort of scaled properly, so you can probably anticipate some of the design tweaks I am going to make to these cards. So looking at my redesign, as you can see, I didn't want to change too much about these things, but I have elected to buff the base damage from 30 to 50 on this attack. And I even honestly debated raising this even higher, but I've kind of elected to keep it at 50 just because we do have 3 different Wormadams. They can hit a variety of different decks for weaknesses. So I think that's a fair trade-off between buffing this base damage a little too much. And then from there, the other change I did make was changing the HP on Wormadams to 90 HP just to make sure they are lovable, searchable as well. For our next Pokemon, we are going to have a much more substantial overhaul of the entire evolution line. That's going to be Empoleon, but also we are going to be retooling Piplup and Prinplup as well. So of course, starting with Piplup, paralysis on a coin flip is not the worst, and very frequently we've seen these styles of pre-evolutions be the favored in these styles of evolution decks. But let's take a look at the changes that I have made to this card. So right out the gate, I have buffed it to HP up to 70. 60 is acceptable, but this is a stage 2. I really want to push these a little harder to make sure they are a little bit more competitive. But then we've also foregone the bubble attack in favor of Call for Family, where we search our deck for 2 basic Pokemon and put them onto our bench. And the reason I have made this change is because I wanted to have some synergy with the changes that I made to Empoleon. So as we get to that, this new attack will make a little bit more sense. Of course, up next from there, we do have Prinplup. And while a lot of the time you are just going to be evolving via rare candy or using Empoleon's ability, yes, I am not changing that, to get your Empoleons into play, I do want to make sure Prinplup was at least a serviceable stage 1. So the current one is okay, 90 HP is great, level ball searchable, and 1 for 30 is not the worst thing ever. But realistically, if we're attacking with Prinplup, we're in a really bad spot. So as you can see, I have elected to basically just replace this attack with a buffed version of Bubble from the Piplup that we just had. And while yes, if you are attacking with Prinplup, you're still kind of in a sketchy situation, more than likely, but at least if you are attacking with this, you can potentially paralyze your opponent and buy you that extra turn to be able to mainly evolve into your Empoleons. Not a broken design by any stretch of imagination, but I do think this does at least reward you a little bit more for having to go through the trouble of manually evolving through a stage 1. But of course, let's take a look at Empoleon. I think this card was such a huge missed opportunity in Brilliant Stars. It's a stage 2 Pokemon with this very cool ability. Once during your turn, if this Pokemon is in your discard and you have no cards in your hand, you may put this Pokemon onto your bench. If you do, draw 3 cards. This gives you another way at cheating those evolutions into play without sometimes having to evolve through things like rare candy or through Prinplup, and it's just going to make your Empoleon deck a little bit more consistent. But unfortunately, Water Arrow is such a bad attack. 1 for 60 on a stage 2 is absolutely unacceptable. So it definitely looks like when they were designing this card, they wanted to push it as a Pokemon to use for its ability and not actually build an Empoleon deck. And yeah, we're not having that. We want an actual Empoleon deck, and that's what my redesign is going to be focused on. So as you can see, I liked a lot of the current things about this card, but it's really just this attack that definitely needed a change. I wanted to stay somewhat faithful to the original idea of the attack, being able to snipe anywhere, but for this version of Water Arrow, I'm going to have the attack do 50 to one of your opponent's Pokemon for each Piplup, Prinplup, and Empoleon you have in play. You know, if you are playing a designated Empoleon deck, I think a lot of the times you're going to be sniping for around 150, but thanks to this ability, you even do have ways at cheating additional Empoleons in play and be able to theoretically max out at a 300 snipe. I purposely went with that amount of damage just because you won't be able to snipe fresh VMAXs with an attack like that. And now hopefully my changes to Pip Up also kind of made sense as well. Call for Family is a common attack we see on pre-evolutions anyways, so we may as well give it that and be able to synergize a little bit better with this final attack it is trying to build up to. I really like how this evolution line turned out, and I'm really sad that the actual one that we have is nowhere near this interesting. Next up, we're going to take a stab at redesigning Gloria. This was instantly a card I knew I wanted to cover in this video because it's kind of like the spiritual successor to Bridget, which was a very format-defining card for the longest time. And Gloria just really falls short of being able to live up to the promise of its predecessor, and I really wasn't happy with that being the case. So Gloria is a pretty cool supporter. You get to search your deck for 3 basic Pokemon that don't have a rule box and put them onto your bench, then shuffle your deck. But the issue with this card right now is we have so many great search options right now between things like Ultra Ball, Quick Ball, etc. But also we have Battle VIP Pass, which does a similar thing. And that's an item card, which means you can even play that on the first turn. Whereas with Gloria, if you are going first, you actually can't play this. And at that point, you may as well have just been playing Battle VIP Pass or just more copies of some of these other Pokemon search cards. And yes, as you can see, I've just made one simple change. If you go first, you may play this card during your first turn. And honestly, even with this change, I'm not sure if Gloria will still see the amount of play that its predecessor Bridget did, but nevertheless, this at least gives the card a shot, which it just doesn't have at the moment. Next up, we have Pachirisu. And much like with Wormadam, this is another kind of cool one-prize Pokemon that I think is just a little bit shy of being at the level of competitive viability that I really want from it. Pachirisu has the Wind Up Thunder attack, and it does 3 damage for each Pokemon tool attached to all of your Pokemon. Honestly, this attack isn't horrible as is. I think it's fairly balanced. You need 2 attachments, but you have the potential to one-shot anything thanks to cards like Honchkrovi. But I wanted to push this just a little bit further from being a decent sort of rogue tier 2 deck into being something that people have to treat maybe a little bit more seriously. So the big addition I made to this right out the gate is the inclusion of a new first attack for only 1 colorless energy. And this is actually the same attack that was on Mawile from Crystal Guardians and also its spiritual reprint that it got back in Celestial Storm. It's going to be the mining attack. You search your deck for an item card, reveal it, and put it into your hand. Then shuffle your deck, but if that card is a Pokemon tool, instead of putting it into your hand, you may attach it to one of your Pokemon that doesn't already have a Pokemon tool attached to it. The Pachirisu deck can't really do a whole lot on turn 1 just because of this double energy attack, and now this at least gives you something you can try to do on your first turn. If you attached a lightning energy from hand, you can actually search your deck for an EXP share and put it onto a bench Pachirisu in case your active does get knocked out. Or if you have like a dead hand, you can search your deck for a lucky egg and put it on your Pokemon. And then the other change I've made is one that is a little bit more subtle, but we are giving Pachirisu the proper tool drop attack. Wind Up Thunder is very similar, but the big difference between that and the tool drop attack we've seen in the past on cards like Trubbish and Doublade is that tool drop counted the Pokemon tools attached to all Pokemon, whereas Pachirisu currently only counts for Pokemon tools attached to yours. So while I don't think this is going to massively increase your damage output, be able to count maybe an extra air balloon or choice belt on your opponent's field might give you that push that you need to take a big one shot. One of the changes that I did think about making was giving this card a 2 colorless energy attack cost, as the energy cost is kind of the big downside to Pachirisu currently. But honestly, guys, we have a lot of single prize, basic, and stage 1 attackers that already have similar double colorless energy based attacks. So I did opt to keep its slightly annoying lightning colorless attack cost just to differentiate it a little bit more from those and kind of force this deck to have a different engine and not just blend in with the rest of these. And for the final card we're going to redesign, this has to be Garchomp. Garchomp is like the king of getting these really interesting stage 2 cards that just barely miss the mark. And of course, the new one in Brilliant Stars is no different as well. So of course, the normal Gible that we have is nothing special. I actually think this attack is really, really bad. 2 manual attachments on a 70 HP Pokemon to do 30 basically means this card may as well not even have an attack. But let's take a look at the change I've made. So as you can see, I've kept everything the same about this, including its god-awful attack, but to make up for that, I've given it the Submerge ability. As long as this Pokemon is on your bench, prevent all damage done to this Pokemon by attacks, both yours and your opponent's. The whole theme of Garchomp is to deny KOs, and I wanted to stay true to that for the rest of its evolution line as well. I did initially have a different ability that I was going to put on this Gible, but I do think it may have been maybe too strong, given the context of the stage 2 it evolves into as well, but more on that ability later. One of the big issues issues Stage 2 decks have just in general, though, is the lack of space, especially Garchomp, since the Garchomp does discard cards from its deck. So since we have this ability on Gilles, we don't need to play Manaphy, so that basically gives us one extra spot in the deck just with this one change. That way cards like Rapid Strike Urshifu and Jolteon can't pick off your basics before you get up and running, quite as easily at least. That being said, moving on to Gabite. Gabite, unfortunately, is just as awful as its pre-evolution. It has a 2 energy attack cost to do a flat 70. And if we're attacking with Gabite, guys, you know, we are going to be in a really bad spot. So let's see how I decide to spice this thing up. Much like in the case of Gible, I have elected to give this thing a very powerful ability that does have synergy with Garchomp. This is actually the same ability that was on the Vibrava back from Cosmic Eclipse. And this one says, whenever your opponent plays a supporter from their hand, prevent all effects of that card done to this Pokemon. So obviously that means cards like Boss's Orders, most notably, will not be able to target down these Gabites and bring them up. Just to reiterate, Garchomp is all about denying your opponent's KOs, but one of the big issues the deck has is that your opponent can just target down stuff on the bench and kind of deny the big advantage that Garchomp's ability currently grants it. Like I said, I did actually think about putting this on Gible, but I wasn't sure if that would be too balanced or not. I think given how good Garchomp's ability is, I felt like it was maybe a little bit more fair to put this on the stage 1 here. And of course, that only leaves the big guy himself, Garchomp. I love the ability on this thing, being able to prevent all damage from your opponent's attacks whenever you evolve this thing, and theoretically forcing your opponent to like kind of 2-shot a stage 2 Pokemon that gets at 1 prize is just so sick. I really love the design of this ability. However, your opponent can just play things like Escape Rope and Boss to get around this thing, but as you just saw, I think I have mitigated that to some degree thanks to these new pre-evolution designs, but the card definitely has some other issues that I do want to address. Most notably, this attack. Discarding the top 2 cards of your deck is never fun, but I think if we're a basic or maybe a V-Star or V-Max deck, you know, we typically have a little bit more deck space and more flexible cards that we can discard, but being a stage 2 means you almost never have any sort of extra space in your deck, and because this is the attack you've built your deck around, you actually have to include extra copies of cards to account for the discarding effect that's going to happen to your deck. So let's go ahead and check out my redesign for Garchomp. As you can see, the big thing is this attack. I think the damage output of this thing was totally fine to begin with. 160 is a fair 2-shotting amount of damage, but instead of having the Dragon Blade attack, now we've given it Dragon Claw just to do the flat 160. And as a result, we don't have to play as many counts of cards to account for this discarding effect, and no longer have to worry about important, crucial cards like rare candies being discarded. And the other change I've made is kind of a small one, but I think it makes sense for Garchomp. We've given it a free retreat. Having a 1 retreat cost wasn't the worst thing in the world, but Garchomp has had plenty of cards throughout the Pokemon TCG that have a free retreat cost, so let's go ahead and give him that at least, as another way of just giving this card a slight little bump in the right direction. And I think between these tweaks and the tweaks to the pre-evolutions, that would actually take Garchomp from being right now, which is like kind of like a tier 2.5, tier 3 deck, into being something I would actually consider playing at the least at like a League Cup. But those are going to wrap up the 5-ish cards from Brilliant Stars that I wanted to redesign today. But as always, I want to hear from you guys. What do you think about these redesigns today? Do you think I made any of them maybe a little too OP? Or do you think maybe I didn't go quite far enough with them? Sound off down below in the comment section about the ones we talked about today. And let me know if there's any other cards that you think from the set should have gotten tweaked. But as always, if you did enjoy today's video, be sure to smack that like button. And if you want to take your support to the next level, you can also become a patron at patreon.com/rarecandytcg. or pick up some merch at rarecandytcg.com. Links to those will be down below in the description. But as always, thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.